Well, as this unfolds, Richard, I wonder what your thoughts are. Does it surprise you? And how strong do you think this faction of the military is? Do you believe they'll be able to pull off a coup?
It's easier to answer your first question than the second. It's not totally surprising given how polarized Turkish society has become, how strained relations have been and continue to be between the military and Mr. Erdogan and others. In terms of the strength of this faction, their agenda, and a million other questions, nobody, at least on the outside that I've seen, has the answers to that.
All right, let me ask you then, when you say polarized, I automatically think of what I just witnessed in London, 52 to 48, as far as the split there. What I feel like we have here in the U.S., which is an almost, I think the most recent New York Times poll says 40% for Clinton, 40% for Trump. Is it that kind of polarization in Turkey where you've got almost a dead even split?
Well, it's hard to say because the electoral process itself has been somewhat skewed, and the military doesn't stand, if you will, against Erdogan or anybody else. What you have, though, a lot of indications of a society that has multiple fault lines, whether it's between various Kurdish political activists and the government, or between secularists and people who are anything but secularists, between traditional left and right, a lot of that personal animosity against Mr. Erdogan. So what you're seeing is simply a society that's increasingly characterized by its divisions. But I don't think it lines itself up as a neat one side versus another side thing, as you see in situations like the United States, say, or Britain.
Richard, what are the national security implications of this for the United States?
Well, it's enormous. Turkey is one of those critical countries by virtue of its geography that is central in multiple forms. Most recently, obviously, in the Middle East. Turkey, what it does and doesn't do has a tremendous impact, among other things, what happens vis-a-vis ISIS, what happens in Syria. It's also been the principal conveyor belt in both directions, in one direction for recruits joining ISIS and the other direction for refugees heading north into Europe. So you've got all those issues. Turkey's obviously a member of NATO. So it's one of those countries that probably doesn't get the attention it deserves, but whether you're looking at European issues, Middle Eastern issues, and to some extent even Eurasian issues, Turkey turns out to be, as history would suggest, given it's the role of back in Constantinople, now Istanbul, Turkey has always been pivotal.
Richard, as my colleague here, Matt Miller, had mentioned earlier in our coverage, there are conflicting reports about exactly what's going on. And as you know, we are in the early stages of this, so that is not unexpected. But what we have been hearing is that some of those who have decided to take this action against the government are blaming the government, saying it's corrupt and that it's not doing enough to fight terrorism. Is that the valid argument that they will use for having taken this action?
They're emphasizing a lot about the rule of law. There are all sorts of charges against Erdogan's family on corruption. There's lots of criticism about what he's done or hasn't done vis-a-vis the Kurds. Look, but the real question will be, does that justify the fact that they're acting in an extra-democratic way? Just the question is simply who prevails. If Mr. Erdogan prevails, the question then is what does retribution look like? What happens within Turkey? Does this then become grounds or justification for him to do further crackdowns and further dismantling of Turkish democracy? If those behind the coup were to win, the issue then is what is their agenda? And there's also a third possibility if neither side wins anytime soon and you have some prolonged standoff, which could lead to quite a lot of domestic violence. So this could play out in lots of ways.
I wonder, Dan Moss was just on set with us, and he was reminded of the August putsch in Russia when Yeltsin and some hardliners tried to overthrow Gorbachev's government. That coup lasted, 2 or 3 days. It turned out to be unsuccessful, but it just shows you, Richard, that a coup doesn't always immediately yield results. It wouldn't surprise you, I'm guessing, to see this thing last throughout the weekend, even throughout the next week.
It wouldn't surprise me. It could also be resolved quickly. I don't mean to duck your question, but it would, because a lot of people may wait and see. No one wants to end up on the wrong side of this. So people may want to see which way it seems to be tilting, and then they will rally around what's called bandwagoning on the side that seems likely to prevail, which makes it self-fulfilling. The one thing we haven't talked about also, which I think is interesting, is what outsiders do, what the United States does, what various European governments do, and at least so far at least, you see an awful lot of wait-and-see postures. I think outsiders also want to get a sense of how this is playing out before they either come down and conditionally embrace a coup or conditionally embrace the government.
Richard, is there a possibility or even a danger that an action like this may embolden other countries in the region, other militaries, to do the same?
I doubt it. You've already had the Egyptian experience, which, at least at the surface, is not dissimilar. So there could be other situations, but these tend not to be knock-on or copycats. What happens is you have the political dynamics within each country pretty much determines what happens. This is not something that people wake up and see on TV and say, oh, let's do the same thing here. It really tends to be homegrown.
Richard, give us a sense then, if the Obama administration is having a National Security Council meeting and this is on the top of the agenda, what is their main concern at this point?
Oh, it is. They have been briefing the president reportedly. It is a big issue, and I think the real question, again, is to what extent do they indicate what their leanings are, or to what extent they're holding back? Do they hold back and see how it unfolds? And so far, at least, they seem to be adopting more the holding back strategy rather than either siding with the government or siding with those against the government.